Welcome. This is Dr. Marty with Mental Wellness. The sound you're hearing is not me, excuse me. We just went live. I want to welcome everybody to our program today. We are coming to you live, if this is Monday at 10 o'clock in the morning, you're listening to it at that time, from the Radio KAIR studio in downtown beautiful Humboldt. And I want to welcome everybody to the show and thank Bob and Linda for putting this together. I think, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So, as we're getting started, want to respond to the emails that are coming in, and again, we will be doing this by actual telephone. I'm not sure exactly when that blessed event will occur, but when it does, you will all be aware of it. You'll be able to call in, and we shall respond live, hopefully. So in the meantime, while we're waiting for that, we do encourage the emails to come in. And again, the email address is docmarty, DOCMARTY, 61@gmail.com, and we will take care of those in just a minute. In fact, there were a couple of them that came in with the same message, almost like the same person wrote them, but they came from very different places around the world. First one was wanting further clarification on meditation and self-hypnosis. We spent some time talking about that last program, and I'll do a little bit more of that today because I really want to clarify some things for folks so they get the understanding of what really hypnosis is, because of all the misperceptions and missed thoughts about how hypnosis actually works, how well it can work, and what you can use it for. And secondly, the other thing that came in was we were talking about loss and grief, and we're going to spend some time talking about that as well. And once we get into the issue of the loss and the grief, because we're talking again about pain and what pain means to people, I want to spend a little bit of time focusing in on how people experience their emotional pain and how to bounce out of it, because so often we have residual pain, meaning that it stays with us even though we move on and we think our lives are back to normal and we're interacting with people, and then suddenly we find ourselves getting triggered by something that happens or some experience that just floats through us. It could be a song we hear on the radio, it could be an interaction that we have, it could be a place we visit, or even someplace we just drive by randomly, and we see something that throws us into a memory, and in that memory it comes up as if it's almost like now. So I want to spend some time talking about that residual memory effect, because that is one of the issues that keeps coming up over and over and over in people's lives. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit more about the difference between the brain and the mind. One of the issues that came up in two of the emails was the understanding that the thought process, because it is so important for us to be able to use logic and reasoning, which it is important to use those things, it is not how we want to manage our lives from an understanding of who we are, where we're going with our lives, how to feel motivated, how to bring out creativity, and how to improve relationships. Because oftentimes how we think things are supposed to be is not exactly what they really are, and yet we get stuck in the thinking process, which drives us to distraction. So those are the topics we're going to cover, and again, I'm welcoming you to our program, which you are finding us in an interesting way through the brilliance of what we can do with technology today. I was thinking back many, many years ago when I was doing a radio program on a very obscure little local station in Houston, and we had a listening audience of about 8, I think, even though the demographics said we actually were reaching out more than that. But we kept hearing from the same 8 people, which I found fascinating. And over the 6 months that the program was on the air, I don't know that we ever heard from more than 8 or different 8, but for some reason that number just kind of stuck out. And as it did, I'm reminded of somebody who once told me that if there are 8, there's at least 2 zeros after that, which made me think, wow, we have 800 people listening to us, which is not a real big radio audience. And no wonder why the audience never really took a whole lot of interest in advertising with us, or doing a whole lot of other things that we tried to promote. So in any event, the ability to reach out to lots of people is really a fascinating concept that media is now presenting to us. And yet there's some cautions that we need to be aware of just as much as we need to be promoting it, because we've seen the effect of what bad social networking can do. And by bad, what I'm talking about is the influence of how people can put information out that's not accurate. And yet because it's out there, we make this unbelievable assumption that it must be true. And then we just randomly pass it on to other people, making further assumption that we are doing something good for them by either educating them or making ourselves feel important because now we have something that they might want, and then they in turn take it in, process through it, validating whatever they think they're trying to get validated with, and then they randomly pass it on to all of their people. And in that manner, we're reaching out to millions of people with what potentially could be dangerous, if not harmful, information. And there's not a check to that. It's not like there's a federal communications system the way there is with public broadcasting on television and radio that mandates certain controls. So the stuff that's going out over social media really has no internal check to it whatsoever. And yet we assume, because it's a similar kind of forum, that somehow it's valid. So, with that caution in mind, I really, present that information to everybody, that when you're getting things through the different social networks, that you be very, very mindful of, number one, common sense. If what you're getting doesn't make sense, please don't just pass it on. Secondly, if you're getting something that is of a political nature, a religious nature, or something that would stir emotion up, check it out for reality before you pass it on and pretend like it is. And and it's not to take a political stand on anything or a religious stand or promoting social causes in any way. It's simply because we like to be able to present information that's accurate. And whether it's this program or whether it's you folks traveling through your lives, receiving things from friends or relatives, wanting so much to believe that what you're getting is accurate, take the time and the caution to validate it before passing it on. And that's my little soapbox story for the moment. We're going to take a break in just a couple of seconds, but before we do, I'm going to give people after the break all the different ways of reaching out to me and contacting me, because that was one of the requests that came through. Actually, it was several requests that came through. Is that I tend to get very quick in my speech, meaning I talk too fast when I get excited about things, and I've got a lot of things that I want to share with you today. So, in my haste to not be too excited about doing it, I do want to be mindful of the requests that people have a way to reach out to me with questions, and I know we promote the email, but also I've gotten a couple of requests for some people wanting to actually spend some time with me because they have some concerns about things going on in their lives or in their family members' lives that they would really like some professional help with, and I do want to respect that and to be able to honor those kind of requests as I would in my practice when I'm actually seeing clients. So when we come back from the break, we'll break all that stuff down for you, and then we'll move on with some really interesting stuff. So I will be back with you in just a few moments. Welcome back. This is Doc Marty with Mental Wellness, and I'm going to give you contact information, so those of you waited with bated breath and pencils and whatever recording devices you want, let me run through it very quickly. Well, I'll slow it down so you can write it down. Of course, the emails go to docmarty, that's DOCMARTY 61 @gmail.com. Contacting me, you can go through our local phone number, which is 281-812-3322, and website www.alliedmentalhealthtx for Texas.com. Again, it's alliedmentalhealthtx.com. So, with that in mind, let's go forward a little bit. First thing that I wanted to get into was again, a little bit more discussion on meditation and self-hypnosis. The two are closely resembling each other in that they both go into a deep state of relaxation. The brain goes from the beta wide awake or the alpha wide awake state to a beta state, which is a little bit less awake, into a theta state, which is where the mind is very susceptible to its own inner messages as well as messages from others. But it's pre-sleep, which is the delta state. And in this theta state, we are capable of experiencing great inner knowledge as long as we open up those pathways, as well as putting us in touch with those things that have the most value to us and the things that we tend to find very meaningful in our lives. So when we're meditating, when we're wanting to release out tension, stress, negative values, negative memories, negative whatever, we're going into that deep state of relaxation. And we do it simply by breathing and by releasing out. So there's Eastern Asian concepts that have been applied over the years, whether it's forms of yoga. Chinese have a very interesting way of moving energy through the body as well. And what we're doing basically is to transfer the negative into a positive. And when we're going up through the centering core of the body, through the chakra states, which is where the energy circles are, the centers in the body, or whether we're doing just simply moving that energy through our minds, out through our bodies, what we're doing is really creating an inner state of peacefulness. And in that inner state, we are very capable of experiencing inner knowledge, inner wisdom, as well as bringing in positive messaging from outside of us, whether it's from the universe or whether it's from people we love and care about, or just that sense of being together with a group of people sharing like-minded perceptions and experiences together. So in a meditation, that's what we're doing. In a state of self-hypnosis, we're adding an additional feature to it, which has something to do with a directed message. That being something we are either focusing on changing or reinforcing about us as people. We could take with us into an inner state of hypnosis something about sleeping better. So before we go to sleep, we go into a self-hypnotic state in which we give ourselves permission to experience that deep sleep. And we prepare our minds for that expectation so that we can fulfill it, which is basically one of the inner needs that our subconscious mind has, is to fulfill our own expectations. We can also use self-hypnosis for looking at changing behaviors. We can find ourselves not wanting to get in conflict with people. So we give ourselves that inner message that when we're interacting with them, we're either going to change our perception of them for that moment, or perhaps we will see them differently, or we can entirely hallucinate if we'd like, and sometimes we can actually create the image of somebody who we really don't care to be around, but when they're looking like Donald Duck, or they're doing weird things, they become less intrusive in our lives, less negative, and they can actually become rather funny. And it's real hard to have negative impressions of things that we perceive as being funny. I had one client many years ago who told me that her father-in-law reminded her of Fred Flintstone. And I said to her, so do you start laughing when you see Fred Flintstone coming to your house? And she said she never really thought that she could until I suggested to her, well, what if he were with Barney and they were about to go to the bowling alley and you see them running their feet on the ground with their vehicles, and she said, I get the idea. That could actually be a pretty funny experience. And she actually applied it, and in fact embarrassed herself apparently when the father-in-law showed up at the house, and one of the first things out of her mouth was, how's Barney? And of course it kind of lightened up the entire situation for her and embarrassed her, but the point was she no longer saw him as being this nasty creature that she had come to almost dread after 6 years of being married. So there's ways that we can alter that state of awareness by using self-hypnotic messages. We can also use it to help ourselves change different beliefs that we have about things by changing our perception of what we experience. And we already know from past discussions that how we see things, we tend to believe them to be real. When we see a traffic accident, we tend to believe that what we just saw, what we just experienced, is a real thing that we just experienced. And yet we know that traffic police will often interview as many possible witnesses as they can to those traffic accidents, because they know when they interview 10 people, they're likely to get 10 different perceptions of what people saw. And yet we know that each one of them truly believes what they saw was real, and yet they're different. So reality doesn't change because of how we experience things. The reality is what we actually make it to be. And then we have to kind of do a comparative analysis to see what's going on there. From a self-hypnotic standpoint, though, we can improve the quality of what we experience by weeding out our emotional states, because we know that emotions directly affect how we see, how we hear, how we taste and touch and smell, because all of that information lends itself to interpretation of how the mind conceptualizes what it's experiencing. So from an internal state, from a self-hypnotic state, we can strengthen that perceptual cueing process. We can also do other things to augment it. We can learn how to release out memories that we really don't want to be affecting us anymore. And the more identifiable those memories are, generally the easier it is to change them or to eliminate them. So what we're focusing on is really an internal state. And in that state, which is self-hypnotic, we create change. And then the change becomes as permanent as we desire it to be. It becomes as strong as we desire it to be. And we're able to take on more and more understanding and awareness simply because we can do that. So there's just some basic differences between the two. I want to move on to the issue of pain again, which is where we're dealing with the issues of loss and grief. The question was, how do I know whether I'm grieving a situation or whether I'm just responding to the loss? And in reality, there's not a whole lot of difference between the grief and the responding being a feeling of loss, because they're basically experiencing their same similar experiences. The difference tends to come about in a time factor and in the intensity factor, because we know when something is very fresh when a loss is very fresh, like we've just experienced with the passing of Kobe Bryant, there not only is the loss issue, but there's the shock value. The shock value intensifies the feeling of what we're experiencing, which is the loss. There's an initial not wanting to believe quality that we'll experience. There can often be a reaction of, oh my God, how could this possibly have happened? Some of us may be looking for factual information to figure out, what was that helicopter doing up in the air when there was foggy conditions and it wasn't ideal flight condition. And we'll go through lots of different plays in our mind to try to explain what we're having a hard time experiencing from an internal state or from an emotional state. The validity of what we experience is, of course, the grief, because we know that losing things that are important to us reacts to us differently and intensely sometimes. From lots of understandings from poets, we know that the experience of grief is similar to tides coming in and rolling out, that over time the tides tend to lessen in their intensity and their frequency, and yet when we're experiencing them, they still feel horrible. We still have to deal with those loss issues. And we can rank different loss issues, and it's been done by social scientists and by psychologists. And we know that certain kinds of losses have a far more reaching effect on us over time as well as intensity than others. And yet we still understand that the grieving process is going to happen, and grieving is not a human quality, it is a mammal quality, because we know that all mammals experience grief. We know that they all experience loss. And what we're doing in that quality of being alive is that we're experiencing everything that comes to us. So the awareness of the experience simply defines that we are in fact experiencing it. So the need to quantify how long should I grieve the loss of this or that really becomes irrelevant, because the messaging is not one for understanding from outside of us, it's a message from understanding on the inside. And that's the part that we have to focus on, is what's happening inside. We don't want to compare ourselves to other people about how long does it take to grieve the loss of a relationship or the death of a pet or the death of anything else that would have value or significance to us. So hopefully that will help clarify a little bit more. And we're going to take a break in just a few moments. And when we come back, we're going to move into some new information, because one of the things I always want to do is to bring in new stuff. And the stuff we're going to take a look at has a lot to do with our self-perception of where we're going with our lives, rather than being stuck with where we are, because that quality of being stuck is not a good place for any of us to be. And we're talking about mental wellness. We're not talking about mental illness again. So we want to stay focused on the well part, which means we increase our awareness of us. So we're going to come back in just a bit. When we do, I'll repeat some of the contact information for you. But again, for the emails, send them off to docmarty61@gmail.com, and we will be back in just a few moments. Welcome back. This is Doc Marty with Mental Wellness. It occurred to me during the break that sometimes we have an interesting thought that comes into our minds, something we're curious about, and I'm wondering what we do with those interesting thoughts when we wonder about them. My fear is that too often we just kind of let them dissipate into space and choose to do nothing about them or actually pursue them. It's kind of like a dream that we have at night, and we wake up and are inspired about something about that dream, and yet we let the day go on and on and on. Eventually we've forgotten about the dream, even though we know we were inspired about something, but we can't recall it. I would encourage you strongly that when you get those kind of inspirational moments, that since we have technology in our cell phones, write them down on the cell phone, text them in, or use the verbal part and record it in. And then play it back later, so it'll hopefully formulate some more thought and allow you to access that creative part of your mind, which we allow to go stagnant for way too long. So, it's again, and we'll keep focusing on these issues. One of the things that I'm really wanting to take a closer look at, which we will in coming shows, is the effect of aging on the mind, because we know that we're running into major issues with elderly folks coming in with dementia and Alzheimer's. And the alarming rate of how this is developing is way beyond what I would normally expect would happen over time. And it's not because we're living longer that our brains are wearing out. It has a whole lot more to do with what we're doing with our brains as we are going through the aging process to allow that stagnation to happen, which allows the protein buildup in the brain that then fosters, unfortunately, things like Alzheimer's and dementia to develop. So the idea of keeping the brain active is a real positive message that we need to be really focusing on. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to start focusing on what we're inspiring ourselves with, which is our own creativity. So as we get these thoughts and these messages, get them down so you can refer back to them later instead of trusting your memory, which obviously, as you're getting up in age, that's less and less to be able to trust. But even for younger folks that have so many different things happening in their lives, what we don't want to be doing is letting go of these things, because they're amazingly important things. The creative part of our mind is one of the few things that we can afford to just ignore. So just a message to pass along to people. And as we get a little bit farther, like I mentioned, we're going to devote an entire program to the aging of the mind and how we can do some things very, very positive about either prolonging the healthiness of the mind, but hopefully stopping some of the negative effects of what happens through processes of dementia and Alzheimer's too. So let me get back to one of the issues that I wanted to talk about today, which has to deal with the whole concept of how we are moving forward with our lives, because we tend to take a lot of that stuff for granted, and we just make the assumption that by going through that rut of that, doing things at home, going to work, coming back home, going to work, that kind of day after day, week after week existence is somehow furthering us along the line of how to live our lives and to celebrate life. And oftentimes we just find ourselves getting lost in the middle of that stuff because it takes on such an important value, but it doesn't really represent who we are or what we want to experience. So we're talking about not slowing things down, which unfortunately I think is a real bad message for ourselves, but it's a way of redirecting the energy so we can start to experience the things we want to be experiencing, and letting go of all of that compelling, driving stuff that tells us we must do certain things in certain ways, in certain orders, which really we don't have to do, but we seem to think we should because we don't have an alternative. So let's focus on an alternative and see what we can do with this. The issue that keeps coming up is the issue of change, because somehow we've gotten into our heads that changing is not a good thing. So we try to resist the change, which unfortunately we cannot do because change is a natural reality of life. What we discover way too often is that because we were born into a world of change, that somehow we're immune to it, without realizing that from our moment of conception we are changing. And we continue to change. The cells in our body are changing. Our organs are changing. The blood that's flowing through us is changing. Every part of our existence, even philosophically and spiritually, it's changing. We don't think the same ways. We don't focus the same ways. We don't even like the same foods we used to eat 30 years ago. So what we're actually moving into is an understanding that we are changing. And the goal is not about the change. The goal is embracing the change. So when we start to focus on the change, whatever it is, you want to take a look at what is it you want to experience, because that becomes a direction. So as you're focusing on what you would like to change and what you would like to experience, again, take out something that you can either write on or something you can record, and spend about 2 minutes with yourself without anything else getting in the way. No other phone calls, no responding to any kind of text messaging, no interaction with people on the freeway. This is quiet time, just between you and you. And identify the 5 things you want to be able to experience in this next 12-month period of your life. And they're all positive. They're not getting rid of anything. They're all positive changes. Whatever they may be, whether it be something like improving your health, improving a relationship, improving the way you see the world, maybe improving your relaxation time, whatever those things are, write them down or record them in such a way that you can reference to them every single week. Now, we're not going to create a mandate. We're not going to create a compulsive need for you to have to do certain things. But I want you to have a reference point for how your life is going to change, because you're in control of this. And the inner control factor becomes incredibly important, because that's how we value ourselves and that's how we start looking forward to things. So jot down or record the 5 things that you are very much aware of wanting to experience. And again, only positive things. And they can be just about you. They can be family issues that you are directly intertwined with. They could be things that you are wondering about that you want to further explore. Whatever they may be. Okay? Nothing negative in there. And give yourself the allowance that over the next 12 months, this is things that you are actually going to focus on. every day, so that in some capacity you are devoting a part of your energy toward making these things become real. And as you stay focused, it'll be interesting, very interesting, to see how well you become the person you are wanting to become through the experiences you want to have. So we're about to wrap up our program for today. But again, I want to once more give you the email address and encourage you to send in those emails. It looks like my cell phone next to me has already lit up a couple of times, which is really kind of fun because I'll be going over them and responding to them. So again, the email address is docmarty, DOCMARTY, 61@gmail.com. Also, if you're interested in looking over a copy of my book, you can find it in libraries. I am just absolutely tickled pink that the library in Shepherd, thanks to Helen Marie, has actually got it out on display, and anybody who wants to check it out can. It's also in most libraries around where you are, because I know when it was published it was intended to get out to libraries so that people could read it. You can also get it from Amazon.com. The title of the book simply is Mind Shift. Your Life Doesn't Have to Suck. So with that in mind, I'm going to sign off for today, and wishing you a terrific week and very much positive focus on what you're going to experience over the next 5 years. This is Doc Marty, signing off for today.